When I first moved into her building, I thought she was just my landlady. But the way she smirked that night and said, "I collect in more ways than one," I realized rent wasn't the only thing at stake. I still remember the sound of my suitcase wheels scraping against the old concrete as I dragged it up the narrow stairwell. The building had that mix of age and stubborn dignity, the paint a little chipped, the steps worn smooth by years of tenants. Yet it stood as if it refused to surrender to time. I was tired, rainwater dripping from the cuffs of my jacket, but relief washed over me when I reached the second floor. There she was, leaning casually against the doorframe of the apartment I'd rented, arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. She didn't look like what I imagined a landlady would. No clipboard, no stiff efficiency. Instead, she carried herself with a kind of easy grace. Early 40s, hair pinned back in a way that let a few strands fall loose around her face, eyes sharp but softened at the edges. There was confidence in her posture, but also something quieter behind it, a depth I couldn't name yet. "You finally made it," she said, her voice smooth, lightly teasing. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." I apologized for being late, fumbling with my bag. She tilted her head, studying me with an amused patience that made me all the more self-conscious. The key was already in her hand, dangling loosely from her fingers. When I reached for it, she didn't pass it right away. Instead, she looked me over for a beat longer than necessary, then let the key drop into my palm. Her touch lingered, warm, deliberate. "You'll find I collect in more ways than one," she murmured with that smirk again, almost as if it were a private joke I wasn't in on yet. The remark hung in the air between us, half playful, half mysterious. I managed to laugh, though inside I wasn't sure if I should be flattered, unsettled, or simply intrigued. Something in her eyes suggested she knew exactly the effect her words had on me. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and wood polish. Boxes were stacked in the corners, the radiator clanged with old pipes, and a single window let in the fading gray light of evening. She stepped in behind me, her heels soft against the floorboards, and did a quick sweep of the place, checking the locks, adjusting a crooked curtain rod. "I like to make sure my tenants feel taken care of," she said, her tone carrying just enough weight to blur the line between professional and personal. I thanked her, unsure what else to say. The rain tapped against the glass, and for a moment, it was just the two of us standing in that quiet space, her presence filling the room more than the furniture ever could. When she finally left, her perfume lingered in the air like a secret, subtle and unforgettable. That first night, I couldn't shake the memory of her smirk. And though I told myself she was just my landlady, something about the way she said those words made me wonder if I'd stepped into more than just a lease agreement. The morning after I moved in, I woke to sunlight pushing its way through thin curtains and the faint hum of the city outside. My body was stiff from unpacking half the night, and my jacket, still damp from yesterday's rain, hung over the back of a chair. I slipped it on anyway, shoving my hands deep into the worn pockets, and stepped into the hall. That's when I saw her. She was standing just outside her door, framed by the gentle glow of morning light spilling through the stairwell window. A mug of coffee steamed in her hand, the smell rich and comforting. She wore something casual, a soft cardigan, hair loosely tied back, but the simplicity only made her look more striking. She noticed me right away, her lips curving into that same knowing half-smile. "Morning," she said, her voice still warm from sleep. "Settling in all right?" I nodded, rubbing the back of my neck. "Trying to. Still feels a little empty in there." Her gaze flicked to the jacket I wore, lingering for just a moment before she lifted her mug and took a slow sip. "That thing's seen better days." I laughed awkwardly, looking down at the fraying fabric. "Yeah, it's been with me too long. Hard to let go." She tilted her head, studying me with that thoughtful sharpness again, then motioned toward her apartment. "Come inside for a minute. I just made tea. Might warm you up better than that jacket ever will." I hesitated, only for a second, before following her in. Her apartment was different from mine in ways I hadn't expected. It felt lived in, every surface telling a quiet story. Books stacked haphazardly on the coffee table, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle spread across it, soft throw blankets draped over the couch. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and cedarwood, grounding and warm. She moved with practiced ease, setting her mug down and pouring tea into a smaller cup for me. When she handed it over, our fingers brushed, just lightly, yet enough to send a flicker of heat through me. "Careful," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "It's hot." Her tone carried more weight than the warning itself. I took a cautious sip, letting the warmth spread down my throat. "Thank you. Really." She waved off the thanks, settling into the chair across from me. For a while, conversation drifted easily, small things at first, the quirks of the old building, the best places nearby to grab dinner. But there was a rhythm to her words, a measured ease that drew me in. She asked about my work, about why I'd chosen this place. And when she listened, she didn't just nod politely. She studied me. Like every answer carried a piece of a puzzle she was determined to solve. At one point, she leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. "You're younger than most of my tenants," she said thoughtfully. "But you don't seem careless. You carry yourself differently." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I only smiled, taking another sip of tea. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, charged with something unspoken. By the time I left, the morning had stretched into late noon. As I stepped back into the hall, I caught myself glancing down at my hand where her fingers had brushed mine, still remembering the warmth. For a landlady, she had a way of making her presence feel far more personal than business. And I wasn't sure if that should worry me, or if I secretly hoped it would continue. It started with something simple. She was carrying 2 heavy grocery bags up the stairs, her movement steady but slowed by the weight. I had just come back from a late lecture, backpack slung over one shoulder, when I saw her pause at the landing. Without thinking, I hurried forward. "Here, let me take one," I offered. She looked at me over her shoulder, a faint line of resistance in her brow, then softened. "If you insist." When she passed me the bag, the edge of her hand brushed against mine. Her skin was cool from the outside air, yet her touch carried a quiet steadiness that lingered longer than the contact itself. Together, we climbed the stairs. By the time we reached her door, both of us were slightly out of breath, her laughing at the wait, me laughing at myself for pretending it hadn't winded me. "Stay a moment," she said, unlocking the door. "You've earned a glass of wine, at least." I hesitated, then followed her in. Her apartment glowed differently that evening. A single lamp threw warm golden light across the room, softening the edges of the furniture. The puzzle on the table was still unfinished, books stacked higher now, a faint scent of rosemary drifting in from the kitchen. It felt like a lived-in sanctuary, private and inviting. She poured 2 glasses of red wine and motioned for me to sit. We settled across from each other at the puzzle-covered table, the candle flickering between us. "So," she began, swirling her glass lightly, "what are you studying?" The question opened a door I hadn't realized I wanted to walk through. I told her about my coursework, my plans, the uncertainty that sometimes clawed at me when I thought about the future. She listened, not just politely, but fully, leaning forward, eyes never straying. Her questions weren't surface level. She wanted to know what drove me, what scared me. When I turned the conversation back to her, she hesitated at first, her gaze drifting toward the shelves of books. But then she spoke about her work, the years spent balancing responsibilities, the sacrifices that had left her with nights both full and empty. There was laughter in her stories, but also an undercurrent of loneliness she didn't quite hide. The minutes slipped by unnoticed. We were no longer simply landlady and tenant. It felt like 2 people peeling back quiet layers, recognizing something familiar in each other. At one point, she shifted closer, setting her glass aside. Her knee brushed against mine under the table, a feather-like contact that neither of us moved away from. I felt the warmth radiate from her, small but steady, like a fire catching. "You're easy to talk to," she said finally, her voice low, almost thoughtful. I smiled, the words catching in my chest. "So are you." Silence followed, not empty but thick with something unsaid. The candle burned lower, and outside the night deepened, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to end it. When I finally rose to leave, she walked me to the door. "Don't be a stranger," she said softly. And though it was casual on the surface, I could feel the weight beneath it, as if she already knew I wouldn't be. Rent was due that week, and I'll admit, I had cut it a little too close. A couple of bills stacked on my desk, a tight budget, and a few days' delay stretched into one awkward conversation I had been dreading. When I finally knocked on her door, the envelope of rent in my hand. She answered almost instantly. She was dressed in a fitted blouse, sleeves rolled back to her elbows, her hair tied loosely but still deliberate. The look in her eyes told me she already knew why I was there. "Late, aren't you?" she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. I held out the envelope, trying to sound casual. "Only by a couple of days. Sorry about that." She didn't take it right away. Instead, she let her gaze flick from the envelope to me, pausing long enough to make me wonder what she was thinking. Then, that familiar smirk curved across her lips, the same one she'd given me the night I moved in. "You know," she murmured, arms folding as she shifted her weight to one hip. "I collect in more ways than one." The words hit differently this time. Not just playful, not just teasing. There was weight in them now, a suggestion that pressed against the edges of the ordinary. My pulse quickened before I could stop it. I laughed nervously, though the sound came out thinner than I'd intended. "I'm not sure what that means." Her smirk only deepened, as though she enjoyed the uncertainty in my voice. She finally plucked the envelope from my hand, her fingers grazing my skin just enough to make the moment linger. Then she set it aside on the small table by the door, as if money wasn't the point at all. "You'll figure it out," she said, her tone light, but her eyes holding mine a fraction too long. The silence that followed carried a charge I couldn't ignore. My heart thudded in my chest, and for a moment it felt as if the narrow hallway between us was shrinking. To break it, I glanced around her apartment. The warm lighting, the faint scent of her perfume, the puzzle still unfinished on the table. Familiar, but suddenly more intimate, as though I wasn't supposed to be standing there without acknowledging what we both felt. Her voice cut through my thoughts, lower now, softer. "You're an interesting tenant. Not like the others." I shifted, unsure whether to thank her or ask what she meant. But before I could answer, she reached past me to close the door halfway, the edge brushing against my sleeve. Her hand lingered on the frame, close enough that if I moved an inch, I could have touched it. The smirk softened then, turning into something gentler, almost vulnerable. "Don't make a habit of being late," she whispered, and then, with deliberate calm, eased the door shut. I stood in the hallway long after, my chest tight, the ghost of her words running laps through my mind. I collect in more ways than one. That night, lying in my half-unpacked apartment, I realized I was no longer certain who was renting space from whom. The storm came without warning. By evening, the sky had darkened to a bruised gray, thunder rolling low across the city like a restless drum. I had been sitting at my desk, trying to read, when the power cut out. The sudden silence of the fridge, the hum of the lights vanishing, left the apartment hollow and still. For a while, I sat in the dim glow of my phone screen. Then, through the walls, I heard something, faint, uneven. A shuffle, a muffled sound that didn't quite match the rhythm of the storm. Instinct pulled me out into the hallway. Her door was cracked open just enough to show a flicker of candlelight inside. I hesitated, then knocked gently. She appeared in the doorway almost at once, a small candle in hand. The flame lit her face in soft gold, shadows moving across her features. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look perfectly composed. Her hair was loose, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder, her eyes a touch unsettled. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I've never liked storms." And when the lights go out, her shoulders lifted in a subtle shrug, but the vulnerability was there, unguarded. Without thinking, I said, "Do you want some company?" For a second, she just studied me, as if weighing what she should allow. Then she stepped aside, wordlessly inviting me in. The room was softer in candlelight, shadows flickering over the puzzle pieces and books. She had set a few candles around the living room, their glow turning the space into something tender, almost secret. The storm rumbled outside, but in here, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. We sat on the couch, close but not quite touching. The silence wasn't empty. It pulsed with the storm's echo, with her steady breaths beside me. She held the candle in both hands, staring into the flame as if it might calm her. "I used to love storms when I was young," she murmured, her voice softer than usual. "But over time, they started to feel louder, lonelier." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Funny, isn't it? Confidence during the day, nerves at night." I wanted to say something, but words felt clumsy. Instead, I let my hand rest lightly on her forearm. Her skin was cool, smooth beneath my fingertips. She didn't pull away. In fact, after a moment, she turned her hand over so her palm faced up, her thumb brushing gently against my sleeve. The touch was small, almost casual, but it carried more weight than any words we'd exchanged. It was her way of saying, "I trust you with this." We sat like that, side by side, as thunder cracked in the distance. The storm outside raged, but here, in the candlelight, there was only the warmth of her hand in mine, and the quiet realization that beneath her smirk and her strength, she held a softness she rarely let anyone see. The storm faded gradually, as if reluctant to leave. Thunder rolled farther into the distance, the rain easing into a steady whisper against the windows. Yet neither of us moved. The candle between us had burned low, its wax pooling at the base, the flame flickering unsteadily. She still sat close beside me, her hand resting over mine in a way that felt both casual and deliberate. When the silence stretched too long, she finally spoke, her voice low, almost thoughtful. "You're easy to have around," she said. "Not many people are." The words sank into me, heavier than they sounded. I wanted to ask what she meant, who she had let close enough to disappoint her, but the softness in her expression stopped me. Instead, I simply nodded, my thumb brushing lightly along the side of her hand. It was the smallest motion, but it made her glance down, then back up, her eyes catching mine. Something shifted in that look. Her gaze lingered, tracing the lines of my face, pausing at my mouth before lifting back to my eyes. I felt heat rise in my chest, a pull I couldn't explain but didn't want to resist. She leaned forward slightly, setting the candle on the low table as though clearing the last obstacle between us. Her hair slipped free from where it had been pinned, falling across her shoulder. When she reached past me to steady the candle, a loose strand brushed against my cheek, feather-light. I froze, caught in the moment. The scent of her, faint vanilla and something warmer, more intimate, wrapped around me. When she pulled back, she didn't move far. Her face was close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her lips parted just slightly, the subtle hitch in her breath. The air between us felt impossibly charged, as if one small shift would collapse the space completely. "You should go," she whispered. But she didn't move away. Her words and her nearness clashed in me, leaving me suspended between wanting to lean in and needing to respect the fragile boundary she had placed. My heart pounded so loudly I wondered if she could hear it. I swallowed, searching her face for any sign of what she truly wanted. She didn't smirk this time. She looked conflicted, vulnerable, like someone standing on the edge of something she wasn't sure she had the courage to step into. Slowly, almost without meaning to, my hand lifted, brushing a stray lock of hair back from her face. My knuckles grazed her cheek, soft and warm, and her eyes fluttered closed for the briefest moment. When they opened again, the storm had passed outside, but a new one lingered here, between us. Neither of us moved closer. Neither of us pulled away. We sat suspended in that breathless almost, where a single choice could change everything. And then, with a steadying inhale, she rose from the couch, leaving my hand empty and the moment unfinished. "Good night," she said softly, not quite looking at me. I nodded, standing slower than I should have, the weight of what nearly happened pressing against me. As I stepped out into the quiet hallway, I realized some lines, once approached, never fade again. Morning light spilled through my thin curtains, washing the apartment in pale gold. I hadn't slept much. The memory of her voice, her closeness, the storm's lingering echo, had kept me restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way she had leaned in, the way her lips had parted as if she might speak, or do something more. And then the way she had pulled back, leaving me suspended between possibility and restraint. I was still replaying it when a soft knock came at my door. I opened it to find her standing there, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She looked different in the daylight. Hair loosely tied back, no makeup, a simple sweater that made her seem more approachable, less untouchable. But her eyes carried that same mix of confidence and something quieter, softer, that only I seemed to glimpse. "Peace offering," she said lightly, handing me one of the mugs. The warmth seeped into my hands immediately. "For what?" I asked. Her lips curved into something gentler than a smirk this time, a real smile. "For last night." For almost. The honesty in her words caught me off guard. She wasn't pretending it hadn't happened. She wasn't hiding behind teasing remarks or sharp edges. She was simply acknowledging it, and in that moment, I respected her more than ever. Almost, I echoed softly. We stood there in the doorway, the hall quiet around us. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving mine. Then, with deliberate ease, she stepped past me into the apartment, setting her mug on my small kitchen counter. I don't want to complicate things, she said finally, turning to face me. But I also don't want to ignore what's happening here. Her words loosened something in my chest. I nodded, unable to stop the small smile tugging at my lips. So what do we do? She walked closer, closing the space between us until she was standing just a breath away. Her hand lifted, not hesitantly, but with quiet certainty, and rested gently over mine where I still held the mug. The touch was simple, but it steadied everything inside me. We take it slowly, she said. We don't rush. We just let it be real. I didn't need anything more. The way her hand pressed against mine, warm and deliberate, carried more promise than words ever could. I set my mug down, freeing my other hand to cover hers. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she leaned in, not for a kiss, but to press her cheek lightly against my chest. I felt her breath, steady and calm now, and the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat against mine. We stood there in the golden light of morning, holding on to something fragile yet certain. No smirk this time. No teasing. Just two people acknowledging what had been building all along. And though the world outside carried on, cars passing, the city waking, in that small apartment, I knew something had begun that neither of us intended to let go. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more slow burn age gap romances, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves heartfelt storytelling. Your support helps me bring more of these moments to life.